My name is Stella. I'm 30 years old, and it has taken me many years to fully grasp a bitter truth in my family. I was never the priority. When we were children, my brother, Jake, and I were inseparable. We engaged in every game together, shared every last piece of cake, and would instinctively cuddle up whenever storms rolled in. But around the time I turned 10, things began to shift. It wasn't a loud or obvious change, just different. Jake started to be treated as if he were the family's most precious treasure, while I gradually became a shadow, perpetually standing on the sidelines. My parents, Susan and Mark, weren't malicious individuals. They never struck me or raised their voices much. However, it was their telling silence when I was overlooked at family gatherings, or the way they lavished praise on Jake, even when he hadn't accomplished anything particularly special, that slowly, painfully showed me my designated place within that household. Jake was invariably favoured, regardless of his actions. When he was 15, he dropped out of a math competition simply because he disliked the test questions. Instead of scolding him, my mother said, "You don't need to force yourself, dear. You're special in your own unique way." As for me, when I won second place in a statewide essay contest, the collective family reaction was a flat, "Oh, that's good," for a girl. These small, yet significant differences accumulated over the years, creating a chasm too deep to ever truly mend. I can't even recall the last time my parents hugged me. Meanwhile, Jake grew up enveloped in a protective bubble, as if he were the sun around which I, a mere satellite, was destined to orbit. When I went to college, I had to juggle 3 part-time jobs to cover my tuition fees. Jake, on the other hand, received a brand new Jeep for his 18th birthday. I remember that day with stark clarity. I had just finished a grueling night shift, utterly exhausted, and there he was standing on the driveway, grinning, as if he'd never known a single hard day in his life, standing proudly next to that gleaming new vehicle. My mum turned to me and remarked, "Don't be jealous, Stella. You're a girl. You need to learn to accept things as they are." I swallowed my anger and forced a smile, but inside something vital shattered. Jake wasn't an inherently bad person, but he was acutely aware of his favoured status and never hesitated to exploit it. Whenever he encountered trouble, whether a teacher reprimanded him, he lost something, or he argued with friends. My parents would invariably side with Jake before hearing a single word from anyone else. But when I came home, crying after being bullied at school, my mother's only response was, "Don't make such a big deal out of it." I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, they would finally see me, truly see me. In my final year of college, I earned a prestigious scholarship and landed an internship at a major media company in New York. I called home, my voice trembling with excitement. My mother's response, "Oh, that's nice. Jake just got a new girlfriend. He says it's serious this time." I hung up without saying much more, and for the first time in my life, I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because I had exhausted my supply of tears long ago. Even now, as an adult with a stable career and living more than 2,000 miles away from them, the shadow of those formative years still quietly follows me. I thought I had moved past it, truly put it behind me. That was until the baby shower invitation from Jake's wife Emily arrived, along with a request I could never have anticipated. And at that precise moment, I realized with chilling clarity, if I didn't stand up for myself now, they would forever see me as the obedient, easy-to-push-around girl they had always perceived me to be. I received the baby shower invitation from Emily, Jake's fiancée, on a Monday morning, right in the middle of a design team meeting. The message was brief, concluding with, "Stella, we really hope you can come. Jake's mom is excited to see you."
어서 아이죠.
I stared at the screen, a cold feeling washing over me. It had been 3 months since my last conversation with Jake, which occurred when I had unexpectedly transferred a substantial sum of money into his account, enough to make our parents call me 3 times in a single night, a rare occurrence. Back then, Jake had just proposed to Emily. They didn't have much money, and naturally my parents couldn't afford to assist them financially. But I could, and I thought perhaps if I was generous enough to do this for them for once in my life, I wouldn't be overlooked. I paid for their entire wedding from the venue at a picturesque vintage garden just outside Charleston to the upscale catered dinner for 150 guests, the imported flowers from the Netherlands, and even Emily's custom-designed wedding dress by a renowned couturier. I spared no expense. I even sent Emily a pearl jewelry set I had purchased in Tokyo 2 years prior, a gift I had once secretly intended for my own wedding someday. I never told anyone that I was the one footing the entire bill. In the contract with the wedding planner, I specifically requested anonymity, ensuring that all the thanks and praise would be directed towards the bride and groom. I only desired one thing in return: to be recognized even just once as someone who mattered, someone of significance in their lives. But what I received was silence. No message of gratitude, no thank you call, not even from Jake himself. When I attended the wedding, they treated me like a distant acquaintance. Jake offered a half-hearted, cursory hug. Emily flashed a quick, fleeting smile and then turned away. And my mother, she casually introduced me to her friends as, "This is the groom's sister. She lives in New York and does something creative, I think." I sat through the entire ceremony clutching a glass of wine, forcing smiles at strangers, and listening to toasts that felt like they belonged to a world from which I was perpetually excluded. No one knew, and no one apparently needed to know, that none of it would have been possible without my financial support. Sometimes I even questioned if I was truly present at all, or merely a ghost silently funding someone else's elaborate grand production. I'll never forget the moment they cut the wedding cake. Under the soft golden glow of the lights, Jake tenderly kissed Emily's forehead as the crowd erupted in cheers. I stood up, intending to step outside for some fresh air, but my mother grabbed my arm and whispered, Jake has finally grown up. It's a good thing you didn't mind letting your little brother shine for once, did you?" I looked at her for a long, searching moment, then simply nodded. "No, I didn't mind. I just didn't feel anything anymore." The party concluded close to midnight. As I went to retrieve my car, the event manager hurried after me and handed me an envelope. He bowed respectfully and sincerely, thanked me for choosing their venue. I accepted it, managed a faint smile, and walked away. No one from my family even knew who he was, just as no one knew how much I had paid to stand unseen in the shadows of their purportedly special day. I drove off into the night, alone as I always seemed to be. But this time I wasn't sad. I felt something different, something much clearer. They didn't need me to be their silent hero anymore, and I most definitely didn't need to play that unfulfilling part ever again. I didn't anticipate that just a few weeks later they would approach me again. But this time it wasn't for assistance. This time everything was unraveling, and whether I liked it or not, I would be the only one left standing amidst the wreckage. 1 month before the scheduled wedding, I received a text message from Emily close to midnight. My phone buzzed as I lay in bed reading the soft glow of my bedside lamp, illuminating words that cut like a knife. "Stella, after careful consideration, Jake and I have decided to have a smaller, more intimate ceremony. We hope you understand. Please do not attend the wedding." I read it over and over, not because I didn't comprehend the words, but because I simply couldn't believe what I was seeing. I sat bolt upright, my heart pounding furiously, and immediately called Jake. He answered after 3 rings. "Jake, what's going on?" I tried to keep my voice steady, but my hands were ice cold. On the other end, Jake sighed. It was a sigh so familiar, it chilled me to the bone, just like the sound my mother always made whenever I did something she considered different or disappointing. "Stella, don't make a big deal out of this," he said, his voice laced with a weariness that sounded almost theatrical. "We just want a simpler ceremony, fewer people honestly. You don't really fit the vibe of the wedding." I froze. "Jake," I said slowly, each word feeling heavy in my throat. "I paid for your entire wedding. The venue, the food, the dress, even the flowers and decorations. You're kicking me out of a wedding I paid for." "We're really grateful for that," he cut in dismissively. "But we just feel having you there would make things a little awkward, and Emily doesn't want to have to fake being happy. We hope you understand." I laughed a bitter, hollow sound that didn't even seem to emanate from me. "What about the money?" I asked, my voice no longer angry, just cold, deadly cold. "Are you going to pay me back, or is this just considered a wedding gift from the sister who doesn't fit the vibe?" Jake remained silent for a moment. Then he said, "Stella, you're the one who's well off. Don't sweat the small stuff. We just want our wedding to truly feel like ours without anyone else's influence, you know." I hung up. This time I didn't cry. I didn't drive to my parents' house, seeking solace as I used to when I was hurt as a child. And I didn't compose a long explanatory email like I did when I was falsely accused of something in college. I just sat there in the darkness, enveloped by that painfully familiar feeling of being pushed aside. But this time it wasn't because I was weak. It was because I had finally decided to stand up for myself, and they couldn't handle the fact that I wasn't remaining silent anymore. The next morning, I received an email from the event company confirming the cancellation of the wedding venue. It came with a brief apology for the change of plans by the family. They informed me that the deposit, nearly $38,000, was non-refundable because the cancellation was too close to the event date. I had lost almost $38,000 for a wedding I was no longer invited to. I didn't say a word to anyone. No angry calls, no bitter complaints. But I meticulously kept every receipt, every transaction record, every confirmation email. And inside me, a plan began to form, not for revenge, but for closure, for good. I was still going to Charleston on their wedding weekend, but I wouldn't be bringing flowers or gifts. I was bringing something else entirely, the truth. And when the curtain finally lifted, they would see exactly who didn't fit the vibe of trust and gratitude within this family. 3 days after that cold, dismissive call with Jake, my mum called me. She rarely called unless it was something serious, and I already had a fairly good idea of where this conversation was headed. "Stella, I heard about everything," Mum said, her voice soft. The kind of manufactured softness from someone who always chose superficial peace over confronting the actual truth. I said nothing, waiting to see how she would navigate this. "Jake said you're overreacting a little," she continued. "You know he and Emily just want something simple, more private. I think maybe you should just let it go." I sat up deliberately, keeping my voice calm. "Mom, they kicked me out of a wedding that I paid for. Do you really think that's a simple matter?" Mum sighed. And that sigh, the one that always made my skin crawl because it was so utterly familiar, was the unmistakable signal that she had already chosen her side. "You're good at everything you do, honey, and we're so proud of you, but you don't always have to be involved in everything. Jake's your little brother. It's his special day. If he feels like you don't fit, maybe you should reflect on how you're coming across. Don't make a big deal out of it, Stella. Don't ruin the family atmosphere over a little personal pride." "A little personal pride?" I laughed a dry, choking sound. "So being excluded from a wedding, I quietly funded being uninvited, not even being thanked, and being treated like a complete stranger, that's all just personal pride." Mum went quiet for a moment, then said something I would never, ever forget. "Sometimes, Stella, you have to learn to step back and let others shine. That's what grown-ups do when they truly love their family."
Grown-ups, huh?
I ended the call without uttering another word, not because I had nothing more to say, but because I knew it was utterly pointless. That afternoon, my dad called me. He rarely got involved in arguments between Mom and me, and even less frequently shared his own opinions. But this time, he was brief. "Ugh, Stella, we know you've done a lot, but Jake's your brother, and this is his big moment. Don't ruin the mood. Your mother and I are asking you to choose silence for the sake of the family. I gave a bitter laugh. Dad, if this is a family, then why do I always feel like the one being left out, the one being sacrificed? Dad didn't answer immediately. Then he said, You've always done everything so well, Stella, but sometimes doing too well. It puts pressure on others. Maybe Jake feels that way. Think about it. Maybe you're making everyone uncomfortable. I hung up. My heart pounded not from anger this time, but from realizing something even more devastating than outright betrayal. They had never truly been on my side. I had spent 30 years of my life believing that if I were kind enough, successful enough, generous enough, someday they would finally see me for who I truly was. But when I genuinely needed to be defended, when the injustice was so blatant it couldn't be denied, the only thing I received was counsel to not make a big deal out of it. I looked at the wedding invitations still sitting in my mailbox, the various wedding items I had meticulously ordered for them and the contracts I had signed with my own name. It all seemed to mock me, a cruel reminder of the good big sister role I had tried so desperately to embody. I used to think that if I stayed quiet long enough, they would eventually recognize my worth. But I was profoundly wrong. This time, I wouldn't stand on the sidelines anymore. Not to start a fight, but to make it unequivocally clear I was no longer going to accept being written out of my own story. They wanted a peaceful wedding, fine. I wasn't someone who relished causing a scene, but I was also no longer the girl willing to swallow every slight just to keep everyone else comfortable and undisturbed. After that final revealing call with my parents, I spent the entire night meticulously going through every email and contract in my work inbox related to the wedding. I printed everything from the deposit receipt for the banquet hall, the rental agreement for the Charleston garden venue, and the invoice for the elaborate floral arrangements to the exclusive deal with the high-end photographer. Every single document was under my name. I had wondered why Emily had never once mentioned any of these financial details when she texted to uninvite me. Now I understood. In their minds, I was the kind of person who would just silently endure, quietly support, and endlessly give like a walking ATM, devoid of feelings or expectations. But this time I wasn't the Stella from when I was 20 anymore. I started with a call to Savannah Gardens, the wedding venue. The manager, a woman named Marianne, sounded surprised when I calmly requested to cancel all the services. Stella, is something wrong? The wedding is just 2 weeks away. I smiled faintly and replied calmly, Nothing's wrong, Marianne. The bride and groom have simply decided to do things their own way, and I've decided to let them handle the rest on their own. Marianne, ever professional, processed the cancellation. Due to the non-refundable clause clearly stated in the contract, I owed nothing further. Next, I contacted La Lumiere Events, the floral and decor company. They had already created detailed, beautiful sketches for the garden elegance theme Emily had meticulously chosen. I had approved those designs, paid a significant deposit, and even prepaid 70% of the total cost. I sent them a concise email. Please cancel all orders related to the wedding scheduled for the 12th. The remaining balance will be handled as outlined in our contract. Then I moved on to Mason and Ray Photography, the top-tier wedding photographers I had booked 6 months in advance. They had even sent over a mood board for the vintage photo style that Emily adored. I called Ray directly, the photographer I'd been liaising with from the very beginning. Stella, is everything okay? You still have us booked for the 12th. Thanks, Ray, I said, but I won't be needing your services anymore. The couple doesn't require my presence, and I, in turn, don't need to remain behind the scenes of something they're proudly pretending they built entirely themselves. Ray was silent for a moment, then her voice softened. Are you sure, Stella? We've already prepped so much for this. Exactly, I replied. I'm sure. And hopefully the next time I book your services, it'll be for my own wedding, not to stand on the sidelines of someone else's charade. Finally, it was Eden's Table, the high-end catering service whose menu I had personally taste-tested and approved. Calling them felt like severing the final link in the perfect, illusory dream Jake and Emily thought was exclusively theirs. But strangely, as I made these calls, I didn't feel a sense of satisfaction or triumph, just an overwhelming sense of relief. Relief beyond belief. I didn't need to make grand announcements. I didn't need to go public with any of it. No dramatic social media posts were necessary. I simply quietly reclaimed what was rightfully mine. 3 days later, Emily texted me. "Hey, I just heard from the organisers that everything's been cancelled. Is there some kind of mistake?" I replied with just 2 words, "No mistake." A few hours later, Jake called. I let it ring, then ignored it. Then it rang again, and again. I still didn't pick up. On the 6th call, I finally answered, but I didn't say anything. I just let him hear the cold, heavy silence on the other end of the line. "Stella, what's going on?" he finally stammered. "Everything's been cancelled. I don't understand. Everything just disappeared in a few days. Why are you doing this?" I gave a soft laugh, feeling my voice steady and composed for the first time in a long while. "You said I didn't fit the vibe of the wedding, remember? So I'm simply letting you create your own vibe entirely without me." Jake remained silent. I hung up. I didn't want them to crash and burn. I just wanted them to finally understand what it felt like to be shut out of their own lives, to be dismissed and undervalued. And if they chose to erase me from the most important moment of their lives, then I believed I had every right to take back the generosity they had so clearly and so callously taken for granted. On June the 12th, Charleston was bathed in brilliant sunshine. The sky was an unusually clear, vibrant blue. I sat at a riverside cafe just a few blocks from the garden, where Jake and Emily's lavish wedding was supposed to have taken place. In front of me was a hot cappuccino, my phone placed face down on the table. I knew it would start buzzing soon, and sure enough, before 10 o'clock in the morning, it lit up with a relentless barrage of calls and messages. The first message came from Emily. "Hey, what's going on? We just got here. There's nothing. No flowers, no chairs, no staff. Do you know what's happening?" I didn't respond. A second message, then a third, then a fourth, followed in quick succession. When the phone finally rang with an incoming call, it was Jake. I picked up the phone, staring at his name on the screen. Jake. My little brother. The name I had protected, prioritized, and sacrificed for over 30 long years were now trembling on the display like a stark reminder of everything that had transpired. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Stella." Jake's voice was shaky, clearly struggling to maintain composure. I don't understand what's happening. We showed up and there's nothing. No staff, no tables, no food, no one. Guests are arriving. They're all waiting outside. Did you do this?" I took a calm sip of my coffee, then answered softly. "What exactly are you asking me, Jake? Did you cancel everything?" "Why, this is our wedding day." I looked up, watching the busy street traffic flow by. "You said I didn't fit your vibe," I reminded him. "So I stepped back and allowed you to prepare the wedding exactly the way you wanted. I didn't stand in your way. I just did what you asked." Silence. I could hear Emily screaming hysterically in the background. "Tell her to come back. Please, Jake. My parents are furious. Everyone's standing out here in the sun." Then another female voice cut in. Likely my mother's. "Jake, tell Stella to call the organisers. Hurry." I didn't hang up. I wanted them to hear me clearly when I stated, "Because all the contracts are under my name, and I cancelled them legally within the terms allowed. They owe you nothing. Every cancellation was my decision, just like you decided to erase me from your wedding." "Stella, please." Jake's voice grew small, desperate. "We're family." I squinted into the sunlight filtering through the trees. No, Jake. Family doesn't erase the person who lifted them up. Family doesn't pretend someone doesn't exist after taking tens of thousands of dollars from them. Family doesn't say, "You don't fit the vibe," and then come begging when everything falls apart. What's happening today is a lesson, Jake, not a punishment. It's a truth revealed. I hung up. A few hours later, social media exploded with images of an elegant wedding gone horribly publicly wrong. Guests dressed to the nines, standing aimlessly outside locked garden gates. No staff, no decorations in sight. The bride and groom pale and frantic. The bride's mother fuming and making desperate phone calls. An empty table scattered across a beautiful but utterly deserted garden. There was only one thing, palpably present: silence and profound disappointment. I didn't repost any of the images. I didn't like anything. I didn't comment. I simply saved them, as proof that sometimes the one pushed out of the story is in reality the one holding the entire show together. And when they pushed me out, I simply walked away, taking with me everything I had brought to their stage. An empty stage without a set, without a director, was nothing but a deserted, meaningless scene. And I felt no regret. I thought I would feel triumphant seeing them flail in their self-made chaos. But watching a video clip of the scene, guests standing uncomfortably in the blazing sun, Emily trying to smile through her disheveled hair, Jake standing dazed as if he'd been forcefully slapped awake, I felt something else entirely calm. Not because I wished them to suffer, but because, for the very first time, everyone could clearly see my value. Only it was once that value was entirely gone. That evening, after dozens of missed calls, Jake sent me a short message. No emojis. No flowery and sincere words. Just Stella. If you still care about me at all, I'm begging you to help. We need to fix this. I was wrong. Very wrong. I read that message over and over. 15 words, and for the first time, Jake had actually called me Stella, his sister, not the dismissive you he usually used. I didn't reply immediately. I let him wait for 2 full hours before calling back. Jake picked up instantly. His voice was hoarse, like someone who had just lived through an utter nightmare. Stella, I can't even face anyone anymore. Everyone's asking questions. Emily's mother is threatening to call off the wedding entirely. We thought we could manage it all. But you didn't expect me not to stay silent, did you? I interrupted. Jake went quiet for a moment, then whispered, I'm sorry. For the very first time, no excuses, no backpedaling. I took a deep breath, then spoke slowly. I'll help. Anything, Jake answered quickly, desperately. But on one condition, I continued. From now on, if you want me at any important event in your life, I expect to be treated properly. Not as a background character, not as a burden, but as someone who unequivocally belongs there. I understand. I agree. Jake's voice faded almost into nothing. I immediately contacted Charleston City Hall, where they often hosted simple yet elegant civil ceremonies. They had exactly one last time slot open for the following day. I paid the registration fee myself, and even managed to borrow a simple, tasteful white dress for Emily from a nearby boutique. Not a designer gown, but clean, graceful just enough for someone who knew how to appreciate genuine effort. I sent Jake the information with one simple line: be there tomorrow at 4 p.m. sharp. The following afternoon, no one said much. I stood at the back of the small room at City Hall, wearing a charcoal grey suit, my hair neatly tied back. No makeup, no forced smile. My mother looked at me from across the room as if she wanted to nod in acknowledgement, but couldn't quite bring herself to do it. My father just kept his head down. Emily and Jake arrived 5 minutes late. She wore the simple white dress I had arranged, holding a small bouquet of pale pink flowers, another last-minute arrangement I had made. Emily's eyes met mine, no longer indifferent, but filled with a visible, palpable awkwardness. Jake looked utterly worn out, as if he hadn't slept all night. He approached me, paused for a moment, then said softly, "Thank you. Really." I didn't respond verbally. I just nodded, stepping back like a quiet director who remains behind the scenes. But this time, no one dared to dismiss or overlook that crucial role. The ceremony itself took place in a hushed silence. It was a brief, almost perfunctory ritual. No large crowd, no live music, no bright celebratory lights. Just the sound of papers rustling, hurried vows exchanged, and the officiant's uneasy glances around the sparsely populated room. When they exchanged rings, the room was dead silent. I didn't know if it was from genuine emotion or from all the conflicting, unspoken feelings floating heavily in the air. Maybe it was both. After the ceremony, people slowly began to depart. Jake looked back at me as if he wanted to say something more, but only managed, "Are you coming with us?" I shook my head. "No. This time you'll find your own way back yourselves, just like you wanted from the beginning." I turned and walked out of City Hall. No one called after me, but I knew this time they would never forget how I walked away. And neither would I. I was no longer the old Stella, the one always waiting, always hoping to be acknowledged. I thought the curtain had finally fallen once I stepped out of City Hall. But as it turned out, there was still one last scene waiting to unfold. And this time, I didn't have to do a single thing. The truth simply revealed itself. A few days after that somber, subdued wedding, I received a call from Marianne, the manager, at Savannah Gardens, the original venue where I had cancelled the contract. "Oh, Miss Stella," she began. "I just had a brief meeting with the bride. Emily, I believe." She came in looking quite flustered, claiming there had been some kind of misunderstanding about the contract and requested that the original agreement be reinstated. I smirked slightly, surprised. Not in the least. "And what did you tell them?" I asked. "I simply showed her the terms of the contract," Marianne stated plainly, without a hint of emotion. "All services were cancelled by the named client, which is you. And because of the last-minute cancellation, not only is the deposit non-refundable, but there's also an additional loss fee of $7,200 that is now due." I thanked her for letting me know and hung up without another word. But I knew for certain that this would be the next bomb, and it would explode at just the right opportune time. That weekend, Jake and Emily held a small post-wedding party at my parents' house, a desperate attempt to salvage a bit of their public image after all the preceding chaos. They invited a few close friends, some relatives from my dad's side of the family, and a few of Emily's family members, clearly hoping to smooth things over and present a facade of normalcy. I hadn't originally planned to show up, but at the last minute I decided to drop by. Not to start a fight, just to observe how they would handle the inevitable aftermath. I arrived about 20 minutes after the party had officially started. My mother nearly dropped her glass when she saw me walk in. Jake and Emily were tucked into a corner, awkwardly attempting to chat with guests. Some people smiled politely in my direction, others pointedly looked away. It didn't matter to me. I wasn't there seeking applause or approval. I was about to quietly slip into a corner myself when Marianne, the venue manager, appeared wearing a crisp white shirt and carrying a folder in her hand. She nodded politely at me, then headed straight towards the newlyweds. Emily stiffened noticeably when she saw her approaching. Jake's brows furrowed immediately, and my mother instinctively backed away, clearly sensing that something was about to go wrong. "Hello, Emily, Jake," Marianne said, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to clearly hear. "I'm here to deliver the official copy of the cancelled contract and the corresponding invoice for the penalties as outlined within that agreement." Emily turned pale. "I thought everything was fixed," she stammered. Marianne shook her head, her tone cool and steady. "Unfortunately not. The only person authorized to reinstate the contract was Miss Stella." She turned to me, nodding slightly. "And she chose not to. Jake stepped forward, his voice cracking. We didn't realize how serious the last-minute cancellation terms were. That's why I always advise clients to read their contracts carefully, Marianne said, not bothering to hide the pointed sarcasm in her voice, before deciding to erase someone from their lives. The room fell into a heavy, uncomfortable silence, as if someone had suddenly sucked all the air out. All eyes turned to Jake and Emily, no longer with admiration or congratulations, but with visible confusion and quiet, palpable disappointment. Marianne placed the papers on a nearby table, turned and walked out without another word. The sound of the door closing behind her echoed ominously through the suddenly still room. Emily stood frozen. Her fists clenched, her face drained of all colour. Jake hung his head, unable to meet anyone's eyes. No one needed to say anything. No criticism was uttered, no accusations were made. The truth had spoken for itself. And for the very first time, they couldn't blame anyone else. There was no "Stella's too sensitive," no family pressure, no organizer mistake. Just two adults who had made exceedingly poor choices and were now finally facing the undeniable consequences. I turned and walked out without looking back. This time I didn't need to make any grand declarations. Because the greatest recognition, I realized, is when no one dares to deny your worth anymore. No one waited until the end of the evening to offer congratulations or farewells. By just after 6 o'clock, the post-wedding party at my parents' house had quietly, almost embarrassingly, dissolved. Elegant dresses disappeared through the front gate, half-finished wine glasses were abandoned on tables, and Emily's relatives made quick, transparent excuses about long drives to leave early. The house became eerily empty, even though just minutes before it had been bustling with forced festivity. But it didn't feel like a wedding celebration. It felt more like a tearless funeral, where everyone was too polite to say out loud that everything had well and truly fallen apart. Jake slumped onto the living room couch, his tie loosened, staring blankly into space. Emily hovered in the kitchen, her face buried in her hands, perhaps in shame or frustration. My mother stood between them, looking lost and furious, but with no one left to blame but those directly responsible. I stepped out onto the porch, where the golden sunset bathed the stone path in a warm glow. A light breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass and the faint, pleasant chill of late summer. My heart was steady. There was no triumph, no lingering bitterness, just a deep, long overdue peace that I hadn't felt in many, many years. I had walked into that house one last time, not to reclaim some form of justice, but to definitively show them that I was no longer someone they could simply use and discard at their convenience. I heard footsteps behind me. It was Jake. "Stella." His voice was hoarse. "Are you still mad?" I turned to look at my brother, no longer the pampered golden boy of the family, but a man standing amidst the wreckage of his own creation. "No, Jake," I said calmly. "I'm not mad anymore. Anger is a waste of time." We didn't think it would turn out like this," he mumbled. "We thought you didn't need to be there. You have your own life now." "Wrong," I said, meeting his eyes directly. "No one in this world is unneeded in situations where they've poured their heart and soul into supporting others. I just got so used to being sidelined by this family, I mistakenly thought it was normal." Jake lowered his head, saying nothing more. I didn't need apologies anymore. Not because they weren't important in principle, but because I no longer required them to move forward with my own life. Inside, Emily stepped out. Her eyes red from crying, her voice trembling. "Stella," she began, "you saved us even after we treated you like that. I don't even know what to say." I looked at her, the woman who had once viewed me as little more than a nameless, faceless support system, now standing there fragile and lost in the ruins she had actively helped to create. "You don't have to say anything." I smiled gently. Just remember this and never repeat it with anyone. And never ever assume someone will tolerate being mistreated indefinitely just because they've stayed silent in the past. She nodded slowly, a look of dawning understanding spreading across her face. Maybe for the very first time in her life, Emily truly listened to another woman without interrupting or belittling her. I turned and walked away, out of the house that was once my home, but had for too long been the place where I consistently forgot my own worth. Driving away, I rolled down the car window, letting the cool summer air carry everything messy, broken, and painful far behind me. I carried nothing with me from that experience, except a clear, unshakable truth I was right to stand up for myself. I didn't need anyone's approval anymore. Because that day's disastrous party, devoid of flowers, fireworks, or applause, was in its own way my quiet personal triumph. Quiet, yet deep enough to mark a permanent change. The ones who had used me finally had to face the undeniable costs of their own choices. My story isn't just about a cancelled wedding. It's about waking up after years of being systematically overlooked and used by my own family. I learned to stand up for myself, not to seek revenge, but to claim the respect I should have been afforded long, long ago. Sometimes it takes a cold, painful loss to truly see who genuinely loves you, and who merely wraps their own selfishness in the convenient guise of family. And I chose to live on, no longer sacrificing myself in silence. What do you think about Stella's decision? Was she too harsh in her actions? Or was it a necessary step for her to reclaim her dignity and self-worth? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful and emotional family stories.